Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are tackling the most destructive, yet absolutely the most transformative period in human history. World War II wasn't just your standard sequence of military campaigns, it was the ultimate crucible. It was an event of such staggering, unimaginable scale and consequence that it literally dismantled the old global system and forged the modern reality we're all living in today. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of an impossibly massive historical event like this, we've got a cognitive roadmap to guide us. We'll be moving chronologically and thematically through 1. The seeds of conflict, 2. The global conflagration, 3. Engines of total war, 4. The turning points, 5. Industrialized atrocities, and finally, 6. The post-war world order. Starting right off with Section 1, the seeds of conflict, unresolved tensions, and the rise of totalitarianism. You know, to really understand how the world caught fire, we have to look back at the embers of the First World War. The desperate economic collapse of the Great Depression, combined with the unresolved harsh penalties of the Treaty of Versailles, provided extremely fertile ground for fascist and totalitarian regimes to rise up. And they moved fast. In 1931, Japan seizes Manchuria. In 1935, Italy invades Ethiopia. By 1938, Germany annexes the Sudetenland, and then the tipping point. In 1939, Germany invades Poland. What this rapid, unstoppable momentum clearly shows us is how international diplomacy, and specifically the policy of appeasement, completely failed to contain Axis aggression. Giving up small territories in the name of peace, well, it only signaled weakness, and the Axis powers completely capitalized on it.
Moving on to Section 2, the global conflagration, blitzkrieg, and the expansion of theaters. So, the war brutally breaks out in Europe. We see Germany's sudden, highly integrated blitzkrieg tactics utterly bypass the Maginot Line and violently collapse Western Europe. Then, following their stunning non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, the tension shifts, and things in the Pacific reach an absolute breaking point. On December 7, 1941, Imperial Japan launched a devastating surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Now, Japan's primary motivation here was to neutralize the American fleet so they could secure vital oil and rubber resources in the Southern Pacific without any interference. This single, incredibly violent event is what effectively merged several intense regional conflicts into one truly global struggle, pulling the United States directly into the fray.
Which brings us to the midpoint, Section 3, engines of total war, logistics, mobilization, and the home front. We have to remember, this wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a total war of entire economies. Combatant nations absolutely mobilized every single aspect of their societies, their domestic workforces, their industrial bases, their financial resources, the whole shebang. But there was a critical structural difference in how the two sides actually fought. The Axis strategy, well, it was fundamentally driven by resource scarcity. Neither Germany nor Japan had the petroleum or rubber they needed, meaning they were forced into violent territorial conquest just to keep their war machines running. Contrast that sharply with the Allied strategy. The Allies relied on immense pre-existing global trade networks, backed up by the American arsenal of democracy and the Lend-Lease program, which was funneling billions of dollars in military aid all across the globe.
Now, what's really interesting about this is seeing what that immense global scale looked like on a micro level. Let's look at the American home front, specifically rural Louisiana. Before deploying, 400,000 soldiers participated in the Great Louisiana Maneuvers. They were literally fighting mock battles with wooden rifles and flour sacks for bombs, just to safely work out their mistakes. Meanwhile, New Orleans became this massive industrial hub, manufacturing crucial landing craft in plants that were notably racially integrated, paying equally across job titles. That practice was incredibly far ahead of its time. And speaking of those landing crafts, check out this striking quote from General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He described Andrew Higgins, the designer of the Higgins boat, as the man who won the war for us. These shallow water landing craft were a seemingly small micro-invention, but they were absolutely crucial. I mean, without them, the massive Allied amphibious invasions on beaches from Normandy to the Pacific Islands simply would not have been possible. Pushing into the climax of our explainer, Section 4, the turning points, the axis of decision from 1942 to 1943. Between 1942 and 1943, the Allies finally, permanently, stripped the Axis of their strategic initiative. And this brilliantly illustrates how it happened. It started with an incredible intelligence triumph in the Pacific. American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications about an impending attack on a target they just called AF.
To figure out where AF was, the US broadcasted a fake, uncoded message claiming the Midway base had a broken water system. When they intercepted a Japanese message shortly after, confirming that AF was short of water, well, the trap was set. This clever intelligence ruse allowed the US to ambush the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Midway, destroying 4 fleet carriers and completely altering the naval balance of power.
Following Midway, we just see this relentless multi-front push toward victory. In the Soviet Union, Operation Uranus was a massive counteroffensive that trapped the German Sixth Army in the brutal urban rubble of Stalingrad. Over in North Africa, the victory at El Alamein secured the vital Suez Canal. By 1944, the Western Allies executed the staggering, massive amphibious logistics of D-Day in Normandy. And simultaneously, U.S. forces in the Pacific were utilizing their island-hopping strategy, basically bypassing heavily fortified Japanese islands to cut off their supply lines, stepping closer and closer to the Japanese mainland.
Section 5. Industrialized Atrocities. The Bureaucracy of Extermination. We must now confront the harrowing reality of this war's unprecedented, state-sponsored violence. 60 to 75 million. I want to isolate this number and just let it breathe for a second. This is the estimated total number of people killed during World War II. What sets this conflict apart from anything before it is that modern bureaucracy was literally turned against civilians. The vast majority of these immense casualties were non-combatants.
Within that broader, incomprehensible tragedy is this number, 6 million. This solemnly represents the Jewish lives systematically and purposefully murdered by the Nazi regime in the Holocaust. To even try to comprehend the scale, this amounted to the eradication of 2/3 of Europe's entire Jewish population through mobile killing squads and industrialized death camps. The severity of the atrocities committed across the various theaters truly speaks for itself. Beyond the Holocaust in Europe, we see widespread violations of human life elsewhere. This includes the severe exploitation and murder of prisoners of war through forced labor and starvation, like the horrific Bataan Death March. It also includes the medical experimentation and biological warfare field tests conducted on Chinese civilians and prisoners by the Japanese military's Unit 731. While fighting totalitarianism abroad, there were also grave injustices taking place right on the American home front. Driven by unfounded fears and virulent racism following Pearl Harbor, Executive Order 9066 resulted in the forced incarceration of approximately 112,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps. But despite this profound violation of their civil rights, many young men from these very camps volunteered to serve. In fact, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team became the most highly decorated military unit in American history for its size and length of service. And finally, Section 6. The Post-War World Order. A world shattered and rebuilt. So, the crucial point is, following the devastating deployment of atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, Japan was forced into unconditional surrender in August 1945. The victorious Allies were then tasked with rebuilding a totally fractured planet. The power vacuums left behind completely restructured global power dynamics from the ground up. The United Nations was established to prevent future conflicts through collective security. The physical division of Germany cemented the ideological divide between the US and the Soviet Union, essentially birthing the Cold War. Financially, the Bretton Woods system created the IMF and World Bank to stabilize global economies. And simultaneously, the absolute exhaustion of the old European powers triggered a massive, irreversible wave of global decolonization. To address the unprecedented crimes of the war, the Allies convened the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials. While some criticized aspects of these international military tribunals, they fundamentally changed the course of global justice. By prosecuting high-ranking political and military leaders, these trials codified modern human rights. They established the vital legal precedent that individuals, not just abstract nations, can be held criminally accountable under international law. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. Looking at the direct jump into the Cold War, the terrifying dawn of the atomic age, and the permanent reshaping of global borders and human rights, we really have to ask, did World War II ever truly end? Or did it just transform the nature of global conflict? It is a fascinating lens through which to view our current world. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it leaves you eager to explore this defining era even further.